By the Grace of Lady Vader. Chapter 19. Lord Vader, Her Ladyship's shuttle's arriving. I took the liberty of sending a TIE escort. Palpatine's fleet is getting too close. Vader looked over Piet's shoulder at the viewport from the bridge of the Executor and saw the tiny speck that was Amidala's shuttle. Luke was with her, confused and unsure, but there. "Well done, Admiral," he said absently. Piet had earned the praise in his position, but Vader's mind was not on any member of his staff. He felt a lurch in the Force some 30 minutes ago, and he knew that something had gone wrong. Not Luke. Luke was with Amidala, possibly the safest place in the Empire at the moment. Something had gone wrong with Leia. He tried to contact the garrison, but no one had answered the summons. Someone would pay for that, but he could not go back to Cloud City now. Palpatine had moved more slowly than he'd expected after the asteroid field, but the blow was beginning to fall. Already they'd seen the scout ships. Com was tracking 15 Star Destroyers and 3 troop transports. The battle would be fought here. "Lord Vader?" "I do not wish to be disturbed, Admiral." Piet didn't take the implied order. "My lord," he said, "I apologize for disturbing your meditation, but I've received tactical news from allies." "Allies?" "Various worlds have pledged support to Her Ladyship, and 4 are sending ships and soldiers." A strange feeling rose in Vader's mind. It was familiar, but had long lain dormant. Hope. He'd known to some extent the word was getting out. Once they'd made their presence in Cloud City public, several of the city guards had let word out. One had heard Piet address Amidala as Your Majesty, and that had been enough. Much of the galaxy had been indulging in fantasies of Amidala's rule. A whisper of it had been enough to set them to arms. Good. Palpatine would not be counting on that. He had known enough to be threatened by Amidala, but so far he had still been underestimating her. The speck that was the shuttle broke the atmosphere, and the speed doubled. A moment later, Com reported that they were requesting permission to dock. "Permission granted," Vader said. "And Admiral, prepare a high welcome." There was dead silence on the bridge. Then Piet straightened his shoulders and said, "Yes, my lord." Then, for the first time in Vader's career in the Empire, the bridge officers broke into spontaneous applause. The welcome was arranged quickly, but it looked neat enough. All the officers who could be spared were arrayed in straight lines in the docking bay, and Vader and Piet stood at their head as the shuttle glided in. When the gangplank lowered, they knelt. Vader was not sure he could have remained standing anyway. He could feel Amidala as always. She was surprised, perhaps bemused, but Luke's presence so near suddenly was overwhelming. His feelings were strong. Vader willed himself to raise his head. The first clear view of his son went like a dagger to his heart. The boy had his own eyes, but Amidala's lithe build and delicate features. He moved lightly and seemed to think deeply. The edge of Amidala's gown swirled across his knee. "Please rise, my lord, Admiral." "As you wish, Your Majesty." She smiled. The veils had been lifted. He hadn't noticed it before. "Your Majesty, perhaps—" "I have not chosen yet, my lord. May I present our son, Luke?" Vader straightened and looked his son in the eye. "It is a profound honor, my son." Luke swallowed hard, taking in the room full of Imperial officers with obvious trepidation. He had been in the rebellion for 3 years, but Vader would not allow him to remain disturbed by the presence of those who were his own people now. He struck a deliberately confrontational tone. "Does something trouble you?" Luke steadied himself. Vader felt the shift in the Force as he used a Jedi centering technique and squared his shoulders. "I'm just disoriented." He blinked rapidly, swallowed hard, and added, "Father." Vader was unable to answer for nearly a full minute. The sound of the word on the boy's tongue brought an uncontrollable rush of feeling, and it took time to understand it. This is the role I was born for, the head of the family. It made him stand even straighter than he normally did. He looked at Piet. Admiral, you are dismissed to return to your duties. Assign the officers as you see fit, and continue tracking the progress of Palpatine's fleet. Keep me apprised of developments." "The fleet?" Amidala asked. "Yes." Vader slowed, and made room for Luke to walk between them. "I would rather that we could set aside some time to become accustomed to one another, but there is a great deal occurring." Abruptly, as if to prove his point, a bright light flashed outside the viewport, and a TIE fighter disappeared. Amidala's eyes widened. "Where is Leia?" "Slowly, answer slowly." But Amidala was not interested in slow answers, not when they were this close. "My lord?" "I have been unable to contact the garrison." "What?" "Han rescued her." Luke's voice was soft, but it carried. Both of them looked at him. "How do you know this?" Amidala asked. "I don't know it. I do, but—" "Speak clearly, Luke." "If she was being held against her will, Han would have found a way to rescue her." Even Vader was not expecting what happened next. He had seen Amidala close to losing her temper several times over the past 3 years, and each time became just a bit closer than the one before. But when she boiled over, it seemed to sear the very force around her. She raised to her veils, and she tore at them. "No, I will not lose Leia, not again!" Luke stepped in, put a hand on her arm. "Mother." She shook him off and started back toward the shuttle. "If your people can't get my daughter back, I will go down there and get her myself." Vader and Luke glanced at each other. It might be the first time they would act in concert, or it might be the only time. Vader could not sense his future yet, but in this they were in agreement. They caught up to her, each taking one arm discreetly, hoping that the officers were not seeing the drama too clearly. "My love," Vader said, "there are perhaps more effective strategies." "Yours didn't work very well, Annie," she hissed. "He'll try to get her off the planet on the Falcon," Luke said. "But don't hurt them. Remember, please, he was trying to help her in the only way he knows." "I won't have my daughter stolen from me again." Her voice was becoming more normal, but they could both feel her tension, both in her body and in the Force. "I will not tolerate it." "Let me try to contact them in a few days. She'll listen to me." "Luke," Vader said, "there are matters you are not considering. There will be a battle here. It has already begun. If we do not recapture her promptly, she and anyone she is with are in immediate danger." Luke took only a second to internalize it. Then his face hardened. He became the soldier that Vader guessed he had been in the rebellion. "How big is Palpatine's fleet?" "Twice the size of our own, but in transit. We have backup units promised to us, but we should not count on them until they arrive." "All right. Can we hold them here?" "Easily. Our numbers may be smaller, but many more of the competent commanders are with us." Luke snorted a laugh. "Most of the rest are in the rebellion." Vader didn't bother to contradict him on this. "Fortunately, the rebellion is not manning Palpatine's fleet." Luke smiled at him cautiously. "I guess so." Amidala was not interested in the upcoming battle. Her eyes were vague and unfocused, and Vader knew that her mind was on Leia, though her words were more general. "We will need you to contact the rebellion eventually, Luke. They are our natural allies, but they may need to be convinced of that." "I know. I'll just need time." The staccato of boots on metal interrupted the family one final time. Pied looked harried and worried. "My lord, your majesty," he said, offering only a perfunctory bow. "Ships approaching from Vector 5. "Additional ships in Palpatine's fleet?" "No, sir. The communications just came into range. Sir, it's the rebellion." R2 beeped noisily while his little arms and pinchers worked furiously to repair the new and newly damaged hyperdrive. The Vaders had apparently gotten creative, waiting for Lando to reinstall the replacement system before cutting several small but crucial wires to render it inoperative. The problem was practically unnoticeable. Han knew he had been saved from another embarrassing hyperdrive failure only because R2 was enterprising enough to run a quick diagnostic when they first got on board. So the droid was welding and rewiring away while the rest of them sat and waited and watched. The repairs were too precise and delicate for any of them to really help. Their pursuers seemed to have lost interest anyway. leaving them some valuable lead time before entering the fray above the planet.
Han, I can't leave Luke here. Please, I know something's wrong with him. We could find him if we went back.
Leia had looked ashen and sickly since her breakdown before, but now her eyes bore an almost manic look, as though she would lose her mind if they stayed on Bespin a minute longer than they had to. And yet she insisted on arguing that they not leave right away. "We've been through this already, sweetheart."
"He came here for me, and you want me to abandon him to them?"
"Your Highness," Lando began wearily, "we don't have a clue where he is. We were lucky to get out of here. Let's not tempt fate again." She turned those wild eyes on him, and Lando shrunk back.
"They're all back on their ships fighting, while we sit here do nothing. It'd probably be the easiest thing in the world to go looking for him."
"In that case, Luke's probably already escaped, and we'll catch up with him after the battle," Han said with finality. "I don't care if it looks like the Vaders and every single one of the stormtroopers have left the city. I'm not taking the chance of waltzing you right back into their arms." Leia opened her mouth to protest, but he stopped her. "Leia, you know that I'm worried about Luke, and that I hope he's all right. But we're no use to him. The rebels are out there. We'll make contact with them, get reinforcements, and come back. Then we'd have a decent shot at this. Right now you're safe, and I'm going to keep you that way." She dropped her face into her hands, but didn't protest any further. Chewie yelled at R2 to hurry up, and got a rather rude beat back, and the room fell silent.
"Your Highness,"
C-3PO ventured nervously.
"I don't know if this will help allay your fears, but I believe that Master Luke is quite safe with the Vaders. They won't harm him in any way."
Her head snapped up.
3PO? She began, her voice trembling with anger. "I should have left you with them."
With that, she stood abruptly and left the room. 3PO's head jerked back and forth, and then his head lowered rather dejectedly. "She doesn't mean it, Goldenrod," Han said, sincerely feeling a pang of sympathy for the droid, despite the silliness of getting sentimental over a robot. He doubted there was anything worse for C-3PO than having one of his masters reject him. "She knows you wouldn't have done it on purpose."
Oh, never, Captain Solo. But I don't expect that she should understand. I'm only a droid after all. Humans don't have to deal with conflicts in their programming. It's all very confusing.
"She probably understands that better than you think, 3PO, he replied. The control console suddenly leapt to life, and R2 rolled away from the wires. "All right, time to get the hell out of here. Chewie, get to the cockpit. Lando, I'm going to need you manning the guns for now. Who knows what we're going to find out there." He and Chewie were nearly out of the room before Lando spoke up softly. "I'm not going." "What?" Chewie grunted the same question. "I'm staying here. The city's in chaos, and who knows what fighting out there could do to us. I have to help." Han felt a surge of annoyance, and it took a moment before he realized it was directed at himself. What was he doing, assuming that Lando was coming with them? He hadn't entertained any thoughts of forgiving him, but had resigned himself to the fact that they were stuck with one another now. Lando apparently found it easier just to walk away. "That's great, Lando. If you think of any other ways to deceive and betray me on your own way out the door, do me a favor and save them until the next time we run into each other. I have a responsibility to these people. And you know all about responsibility to others, don't you? Give me a break." He stepped at him menacingly. "In fact, this is going to be the last time I see you. I ought to punch your lights out right now." Lando's only response was to spread his arms out wide. "Go ahead. I know I deserve much worse." When Han didn't respond right away, Lando continued. "I'm sorry. I know that probably doesn't mean anything to you, but I wanted you to hear me say it."
"Han, what's going on back there?" Leia yelled. "Are we ready to leave or not?"
"Yeah, we're ready." Lando began backing out of the room and heading down the ramp. "Good luck, Han. I hope you get out of this all right." Han watched him walk down the ramp and let it begin to close before muttering almost to himself, "And good luck to you too, Lando." They were all going to need it. Han entered the cockpit, took the controls, and led the Falcon into the heart of madness. "Cease fire!" Ozzel ignored the command that came over the comm, It wasn't from Admiral Merrick, at least not directly and not yet, and no one else outranked him.
Admiral, Sequi began, perhaps...
Ozell looked over his shoulder.
Captain, perhaps both you and Admiral Merrick have failed to notice this, but Vader has control of a superstar destroyer. If we do not strike with deadly force immediately, they will have the firepower to overcome our difference in number. But, sir, your consul, the Emperor's hammer is getting a communication. I was thinking that...
What is it, Captain?
It could be instructions from Imperial Command.
Ozell was about to snap back that he would have been contacted, but then he remembered that Imperial Command had seen fit to put him on a back burner already. He bit it back and hailed the Emperor's hammer. A harried ensign was manning comm.
Yes, Admiral Ozell. His voice was a harsh whisper.
You are receiving communication from Coruscant.
Yes, sir. It is of vital importance, and we cannot risk this interference.
It is well, another voice said, and Ozell's jaw seemed to turn to spun ice. The Emperor waited until he was certain he had been recognized, then continued. This battle will be fought today, and you will destroy this insurgency now, before it has a chance to spread.
Your Majesty, Merrick said, there are rumors of uprisings.
Local thugs. We need not be troubled by them. This is the battle that matters.
Yes, sir.
Ozell smiled to himself. Merrick should not have contradicted the Emperor, and it was good to hear him put in his place. He cleared his throat. Your Majesty, the Executor is still well armed, and it is my belief that we should destroy it immediately. Vader and the woman are aboard that ship. All the more reason I will want them alive at the end of this, Ozell. You may injure him as you please, but I want her healthy. He'll be left alive long enough to watch her taken from him, then killed. I will not be betrayed. He will pay more dearly than an enormous shot from deep space. Yes, Your Majesty. Disable the Executor.
Merrick finally found his voice. Our communications are showing indications of rebel forces arriving, Your Majesty.
Naturally, Ozell thought. The Vaders have forged alliances with the scum of the galaxy. The Emperor didn't seem at all disturbed by it. His tone was certainly untroubled. Yes, of course they've come. They undoubtedly see this as an ideal time for one of their putic raids. Pay no attention to them unless they are a direct threat. If they are, destroy them immediately. With that, the connection to Coruscant was cut.
Admiral Ozell, Merrick said, you will not disobey my orders, direct or implied, again. Captain Sequi, fire on the Executive's weapon systems only. Yes, sir.
The hammer went offline, and on the view screen, Ozell could see it, with the firestorm beside it, closing in on one of the destroyers in Vader's fleet. Then the area became a swarm of TIE fighters and laser blasts.
Fire! Sequi shouted,
and the iron wheel released 3 volleys against the starboard weaponry of the Executor. There was a satisfying flash as 2 of the guns disappeared.
Again!
A shield generator on that side of the ship was taken out, and the weaponry it had protected disintegrated. Sequi, at least, was good at his.
Incoming!
The iron wheel rocked with a blast from the Superstar Destroyer, and the communications panel steamed and sparked under Ozell's hands. He jumped back from it.
Systems lost!
Sir! An engineer called out.
They've hit the main shield generator!
Another blast thundered out, and the lights flickered and flared. They finally caught again.
They're going for life support,
Sequi said, his voice actually astonished at this development.
Admiral, you and the senior staff should get to one of the shuttles. There's a battle skiff in the main hangar.
Ozell did not hesitate. He would do the Empire no good by dying from a loss of oxygen. He clapped his hands.
Attention, all senior staff on the bridge. Follow me to the main hangar.
Several lieutenants and commanders fell in line behind him, though Sequi stayed with the ship, perhaps remembering some foolish holonovel of his youth. The corridors were strewn with debris, but Ozell made his way across it without difficulty. His officers followed, gathering other staff on the way, and by the time they reached the main hangar, there were perhaps 20 of them, a full staff for a battle skiff. Ozell led them into it, and took the command seat. "Ensign," he said to the man at the helm, "take us out."
The skiff emerged into the firefight. It was buffeted by debris from another destroyer. It might have been the hammer itself for all Zell could tell now, or one of the Vader ships, and the helmsman dove it sickeningly beneath the iron wheel. Ozell regained his composure and snapped. "Try to remain level, ensign." "Yes, sir." 5 tighter fighters blew in, each clumsily marked with a scarlet stripe along the bottom, presumably so that they would know not to shoot one another in deep space. "Fire!" Ozell ordered. A commander at weapons obeyed the order, and 3 of the ties disappeared. Ozell was willing to admit that he had made a strategic error or two in his career, but any academy student could understand the strategy here. Kill or be killed. He'd become quite adept at not being killed. The remaining ties tried to turn back, but the commander took them out before they finished the arc. "Admiral, incoming from—" A lieutenant at comms shrugged. "I have no idea." "Tell me, Lieutenant, is there a red mark involved?" "Yes, sir. Then it doesn't matter where they are from, because they are certainly from the Vaders." "Yes, sir." The weapons officer hadn't bothered listening to the exchange. He'd already locked and was already firing. The strange ship was wiped from the sky. There were 2 others behind it. Ozell thought they had looked vaguely familiar, perhaps as trading vehicles from some backwater, except that they were returning fire. "Take us out of here," he ordered. "We should claim the service and discover what weaponry and loyal troops might still be there." "Admiral Ozell, I think the odds are low." The weapons man fired on another ship and destroyed it. He was getting a bit cocky. "Do as I say," Ozell told him. "The laser fire should confuse the sensors on most of these ships." "We'll be accused of turning tail and running." This sank in. Ozell had been accused of such a thing before. "Then we will need to do something of value, Commander." "I'm open to suggestions." Unfortunately, Ozell had none. He stared at the view screen, waiting for something to occur to him, or appear out of thin air. An easy but strategically important target. And miraculously, one appeared. A saucer-shaped disc emerged from the atmosphere, flying erratically and dodging the lasers. "The ship from the asteroid field," Ozell mused. "They must have been Vader's contact to the rebellion. Commander, that is your target." "Yes, sir." The battle skiff, hidden in the net of laser fire, advanced on the Millennium Falcon. Amidala watched the rapidly growing conflict with detached interest. She was in a small office just off the bridge and could see a good deal of what was going on, but since her fit in the cargo bay, she'd remained here with Luke, away from the action, trying to stay calm despite the hair-ripping frustration of losing Leia again. Luke hadn't said a word to her. She thought he was a bit uncomfortable at least having to essentially babysit his mother, but he clearly preferred it to being on the bridge with his father. She wasn't sure that Anakin had said more than 2 words to his son that weren't directly related to their concern for her. She knew in her heart that he had to give it time. But Leia kept proving to her that she couldn't take for granted that her family would ever truly come together or heal. Amidala dropped her head to the cool window and let her breath fog it slightly. Her eyes wandered aimlessly over the battle until... "Leia?" she whispered harshly. Luke snapped to attention and searched for the Falcon over her shoulder. It had emerged from the planet and into the thick of the fighting. "Yes, that's them," he muttered. "How do you think you're going to—" Before he could finish, an Imperial ship came from behind her daughter's ship and opened fire. What are they doing?" she asked, suddenly furious. "Mother—" "Wait!" she cried out uselessly to Leia. The Falcon spun and dove away in a dizzying pattern, one that Amidala recognized all too well from the asteroid field. "They're going to make her run. If she gets to light speed, I'll never find her again." Luke shook his head. "She won't leave in the middle of all this. They'll stay as long as the rebels are here fighting, and I'm sure of that. Father has noticed the situation." Even as he said it, 2 TIE fighters spun into range and began firing on the Imperial ship, giving Leia some cover. But Amidala didn't feel at ease. "Your sister will probably start firing on them, won't she? She's foolish enough to fight us even when we try to help her." A smirk came to Luke's lips. "She probably would, you're right. But Han won't. He never particularly cared where his help comes from. He'll take it anywhere he gets his bearings again." The frustration gripped her again painfully, forcing her to gasp for air. "Why is she doing this, Luke?" He gave her a look that clearly said, "You know why."
"Go ahead. Tell me. Tell me how much my daughter hates me."
"It's not that simple," he replied. His voice was reflective. "Yes, she's known the truth for quite some time, but that doesn't mean—"
"The truth? She's never been told the truth."
Amidala grabbed her son's hand and clung to it desperately.
"When Obi-Wan took you from my arms that final time, you cried and shrieked and wailed so loudly it shook Owen's windows. You knew you weren't going to see me again. You were a baby and far too young to understand, but you knew, and it broke your heart. I heard you crying in my nightmares for years. You and Leia." She paused, breathless, but Luke squeezed her hand to encourage her to go on. "Leia was old enough to call me Mommy when she last saw me. She held on to me, and she didn't want me to go. It tore all of us apart when we were separated," she whispered, "and it's tearing at us now. That is the truth. It doesn't matter what you were told later by others. It doesn't matter whether or how you remember it. It's the only truth that matters."
Luke's hands rested on her shoulders, squeezing them for a moment while he was too moved to speak. Finally he said, "I know that's the truth, and so does she. But you must know that this is a hard truth. The question isn't whether she accepts it, but whether she chooses to face it. And I think she will. She can't run from this forever."
"I hope you're right, Luke."
She reached out and pulled her son into a hug.
"And I'm glad that when faced with this decision, you chose not to run."
The door to the office opened, and she knew Anakin had come to check on her. She stepped back from Luke quickly.
"Is the Falcon safe?"
"Yes, for the time being. It seems that Palpatine himself may have made it a target. We believe the Imperial fleet received the transmission from Coruscant just before Leia fell under attack."
"A coded transmission?"
"Of course." Amidala raised her eyebrows. She felt an idea coming to her, one that gave her a rush of energy and allowed her to focus on something other than Leia.
"He doesn't realize that the days of secrecy in this empire are over. There's no more room for hiding, or secrets, or lies."
Anakin tilted his head toward her. "What do you mean?"
"I mean that it's time that Palpatine learned a few hard truths of his own."
With a significant glance at Luke, she marched out of the office and onto the bridge. They followed her warily, and Anakin nodded to the bridge officers who stood at attention when she entered. She crossed the bridge to take the command chair and turned it to face the view screen.
"Admiral Piet?"
"Yes, Your Majesty."
"Open a general communication, viewer and speaker, on all frequencies as far as it will reach. I want to send a message to anyone who can receive one."
Luke gave Anakin a worried look. Anakin began to say, "My lady, perhaps," but he trailed off. She had the feeling he was too curious to see what she would do to interrupt or question her. Instead, he moved to stand behind her chair, and Luke did the same. "Channel open." Amidala stared deeply into the viewer for a second. She thought about putting her veils back over her head, but she decided against it. There was no longer a need for that. Her back straightened and her hands went to the edge of her armrests. It was a pose she struck often as queen, and she almost smiled at how comfortable it felt.
"Welcome. Welcome to the new era of the Empire."
She allowed a long pause before continuing.
"Even now my family and I have joined with those loyal to our cause, and have begun the end of Palpatine's reign. Once this battle is over and we emerge victorious, the Empire will be free of the terror and oppression that has characterized it for so long. Under my leadership, your freedoms, your rights, your citizenship will be returned to you, and will never be taken again. I come before you now to ask your continued support for me. No matter what side you find yourself on now, Imperial, Rebel, join us, and our differences will be forgotten. The time has come for us to restore the greatness and glory of our galaxy."
There was a short pause. "Channel closed, Your Majesty," Piet said. Amidala swiveled the chair to face her husband and son. "Impressive," Anakin said. "Wow," was all Luke managed.
Amidala just smiled in return. For a moment, Cloud City was silent. Oh, the machinery buzzed on, and the speeders flitted by outside, but the people stood solemnly in the corridors and watched the broadcast screens that normally showed them the sporting events around the galaxy. They watched as Lady Vader claimed the crown, and they understood for the first time, Lando thought, that this was for real. They weren't just raising hell to annoy authority figures. They had chosen to side with a traitor, and they stood here at the eye of the storm, waiting to see how the wind would blow. If it blew against them, they would be destroyed. Lando knew these people. They didn't want to be in this situation. They were apolitical and frequently immoral. And until Lady Vader's unveiled mask had appeared in the air before them, all of this had been a lark, a defiance of Imperial authority that carried no risk, as the Vaders were the only Imperials present. But now, it would be war. It would be war, and the small outpost, the haven where they came to forget the galaxy's problems, was going to be the first battlefield. Lando was as silent as they were. His mind was going over the alternatives. Lady Vader might well forgive him for the escape of Leia if he fought for her now. She might. Forgive you? Forgive you for rescuing an old friend and a girl from people who laid in wait for them and held them prisoner? Forgive you for not being able to carry through with a betrayal? What business is it of hers to forgive you for being a human being for once in your miserable life? That was when it hit him. She talked a pretty talk, but she would wield her husband's iron fist as surely as Palpatine did. Having her favor didn't mean you'd done something right. It'd mean she'd done something she wanted you to. You wouldn't earn her respect by standing up to her, though she might apologize as she had you executed. She might even mean it. The point was, this society she wanted to form wasn't going to be a government of fair laws any more than Palpatine's was. It would be a government of personality, and all the decisions would rest in one pair of hands. People would not live and die by justice. They would live and die by the grace of Lady Vader. It was bad enough with Palpatine, but he was sane. You could count on how he'd act in any given situation. If it didn't get in Palpatine's way, he didn't care about it. If it did, he'd kill you. Not exactly fair, but simple. Lady Vader was not sane. She was obsessed with Leia and with the Skywalker boy. And had that been Skywalker standing beside her? And her capricious kindness to one would easily become capricious cruelty to another. During that silent moment, Cloud City could have gone in any direction. Its most likely course was to choose the status quo, safety in the established, with an alliance with the Vaders a close second. A few were defiant enough to figure it would be an opportunistic time to join the rebellion. Lando thought he could nudge them in this direction. He just had to think of the right thing to say. Unfortunately, an old man, a gardener, thought of something to say first. And what he said was, "It's Queen Amidala!" Then he fell to his knees and clasped his hands together high above his head in ecstatic prayer. "She's come back to us!" Several others in the crowd whispered assent, and a wild cheer broke out with declarations of loyalty shouted above. Lando's eyes snapped back up to the screen, where the final image had frozen in place. There she sat, flanked by her husband and the boy, gripping the arms of her chair, brown eyes flashing with dangerous intelligence. Lando had been only a small boy when she disappeared from sight, but he remembered that image. He remembered the voice and the way she had made him wish to be a Jedi, like her husband, or a king, and half believe he was. Fairy tales had risen about her, and it was whispered that she had sworn to bring down Palpatine, and now it was her. Lando had never really felt terror before. It scampered on cold, sharp claws somewhere in the region just below his ribs, sometimes stopping to nip up at his chest. Palpatine had already lost. The rebels had already lost. All that was left was the Mad Queen and the mad populace who were ready to follow, just like some damn spirit come back from the other side to lead the living into paradise. He wanted to run, but he couldn't think of anywhere to go. Instead, he made his way to the top of a small staircase that led to a deck overlooking one of Cloud City's many breathtaking vistas. "Listen to me,"
he shouted. "Just listen." At first they didn't, but in the end, well, there was just something about people. If you look like you're going to be putting on a show, they'll always turn around to watch it. Lando waited until most of them had caught on, then screwed up his courage. "Look, what's going on here? It's not going to end up good for us, whoever wins." "But that's Queen Amidala," the old gardener said, as if it explained everything or anything. "I know who she is. I read history. I was there for the end of it. But whoever she used to be, she's the Empire now." "That's just politics," a Twi'lek called. "What do we care what she calls herself?" "You'll care plenty when she decides she doesn't much like you and your bar and your dancing girls, children. And you won't have a soul to turn to because her word is going to be law." Chirlin appeared to think about this, and so did many of the others in town. Lady Vader was not known as a friend to the less high-minded pursuits of the galaxy, which accounted for 90% of Cloud City's business. Not that Lando had any desire to stand up here and use the act that she'd undoubtedly shut down the illegal slave-run mines to get them to rebel. He wouldn't mind seeing those shut down himself, but he had to find something. "You, Tina Kay." A human woman looked up, dazed. She was a biologist, and she'd been brought in to try to find a genetic solution to some problems the miners were having after long-term exposure to Tibiana gas. "How do you think Lady Vader, the Empress, is going to deal with your work on the miners' lungs? Do you seriously think she'll let you keep working for the sake of a few unimportant workers, when she has one patient for you who she cares more about than she'll care for the whole galaxy?" He managed to find a few more to poke and prod at. By the time he'd finished, the moon had grown sullen and resentful. But the euphoria over Lady Vader had broken. "The rebellion is coming," Lando said. "They'll make a stand here. Maybe their last. Maybe none of you was ever political before, but you damned well have to be today. Make the right choice." The crowd dispersed in confusion, but Lando had a feeling that most of them would come in on the side of the rebels, and maybe they would stand a chance. Of course, if they didn't, he just sentenced to death the city he claimed to serve. It had been a long time since Yavin, and even that near disaster hadn't prepared the rebellion for what they would see here today. Many of the crew of the Star Destroyer Liberty hadn't been aware the day would very well be their day to die. Being part of the rebellion had made this fact a dictum by which they'd learned to live by, even if they hadn't completely accepted it. The ones who hadn't accepted it had either left, either to Lady Vader's promised sanctuary, or to some other blissful solace entirely. The departure of these had fueled the doubts of the ones who weren't completely faithful, yet still weren't quite ready to succumb. The ones who comprised at least half of the troops that remained on their side, including Admiral Ackbar. No, he wasn't as ready to cave as many, but he wasn't a green ensign on custodial duty either. He was one of the leaders of the rebellion. One of the few people looked up to since the day of the in-unison disappearance of General Solo, Commander Skywalker, and Princess Organa. If the remaining leaders were in similar shape, and if the rebellion didn't fall today, it would eventually. The sudden appearance and communication from the Falcon had quickly pushed back the oncoming tide of pessimism, the whole quickly filling with a surge of hope that hadn't been felt since the days of Yavin 4. If the response on Ackbar's bridge wasn't any indication, just knowing that General Solo and the Princess were indeed alive and present at this battle, putting their lives on the line just as much as any of the rest of them, was almost enough to cover for the continued notable absence of Commander Skywalker for the rebellion. Every section of space within 3,000 kilometers of any side of Bespin was filled with ships of all sizes, some rebel but mostly Imperial. As had been expected, though, nearly all of these ships had been so focused on firing at one another that the rebels had managed to slip in fairly quickly and unimpeded. A few surprise shots had been fired from a group of Star Destroyers, but were far enough off target that the only cost had been a solitary unfortunate Y-wing and one of General Medine's squadrons. In the middle of the chaos, a huge silhouette on the spherical marble tan backdrop of Bespin was the Executor herself. The rebels, Admiral Ackbar especially, knew their aging ships, no matter how many there were, had no chance against that monster, and had immediately begun concentrating their fire on some of the more beleaguered-looking Star Destroyers. Besides, the Executor seemed busy enough,
warding off attacks from the tinier arrowheads shooting seamlessly ineffectual darts at it. It reminded Akbar of a scene from his boyhood in the oceans of Mon Calamari, and the nightmarish image of a large tentacled Krellis beast, being hopelessly converged on by an ever-increasing swarm of black marl parasites. It didn't really matter to Akbar. If the Executor was too busy to be firing at them, fine. If the other destroyers actually managed to incapacitate it or even destroy it, fine. Without the Vaders and their siren-like image of benevolence present, the Empire would seem a far more malevolent enemy than before, and maybe the rebels wouldn't have such doubt on whether the side they were currently fighting on was the right one. Well, maybe there was a bit of wishful thinking in that, he supposed. The whole battle seemed like a swarm, really. Lumbering Mon Cal cruisers and Imperial Star Destroyers here and there, smaller cruisers and transports scattered among them, and moving clouds of TIE fighters, exchanging fire with Rebel X and Y wings and the prototype B wings. General Madine's cruiser was about 300 kilometers to Liberty's port side, exchanging fire with 3 of the Imperial strike cruisers, allowing for the Liberty herself to remain relatively unhindered, and able to allow itself more attention to a task many might have considered more important than almost any other going on there right now, which was covering the Millennium Falcon. It hadn't seemed to need their help so far, though. The little saucer-shaped fighter was dodging hits better than nearly every other ship out there. No surprise, considering the Off displayed considerable skill of her pilot. But nonetheless, they remained near the heart of the swarm, diving hard for the perimeter, where the strongest concentrations in rebel forces lay, but gaining little ground in their attempts to avoid damage. But even the best pilots couldn't avoid damage forever. As he watched, one of the massive white destroyers near the edge of the battle perimeter began turning, bringing its weapons to bear on an area not far from. Then he saw it, just as the green salvo streaked across space. "They're firing on the Falcon, sir." "I see that, Lieutenant," Admiral Akbar barked at the offending voice. "Move our third starboard turbo laser battery to bear on that Imperial cruiser, and—" Suddenly 2 TIEs disengaged from the main cloud and swooped towards the freighter. Akbar muttered an old Mon Calamari curse under his breath. Their batteries, like those of destroyers, were ill-suited for targeting fighters. "Signal our 2 nearest fighters to cover the General." "Hold that, sir," another official came back. "Those TIEs aren't chasing the Falcon." Akbar stared. Sure enough, the TIEs did not seem to be attacking. They swept past the little ship, pummeling their little lasers into the cruiser's surface, melting the laser batteries to slag. But why would they? He wondered even though, he supposed, he should be thankful for small favors, whatever the motivation may be behind them. But that thankfulness was short-lived. "There's a transmission coming in, sir. Wide band, all frequencies." It's from the Executor, Admiral." "Patch it through." There was no need. Unbidden, the spectacular fireworks of battle instantly vanished. In its place, a vision that caused all on the bridge, and Akbar was willing to bet most of the rest of those who were receiving this, to halt completely. A vision of scarlet magnificence, set in the poise of royalty. Only this time the veils were absent, revealing a face that of all things reminded Akbar of an aged Princess Leia. Her very presence nearly eclipsed that of even the 2 dark-clad figures in the room behind her, both extremely familiar to rebellion eyes, particularly the smaller, blonde, unmasked one. One member of the bridge, a Gungan, perhaps middle-aged, managed to gasp. "Disin Queen Amidala," he breathed, the sound filling the whole bridge as the flop-eared creature bowed his head in reverence. "And Commander Skywalker," another added, even more quietly, making no effort to conceal the bitterness in her tone. No one bothered to reprimand their breach of protocol. No one else seemed capable of even forming words. Akbar stared. Could it be? One of the greatest leaders the galaxy had ever known, in her own way being one of the great founding figures of the rebellion, was the same woman who stood before them? Certainly he'd heard the rumors, but that was all they'd been to him. You couldn't win a war based on rumors. But here it was. Not only was it she, but now she and her husband were in possession of one of the greatest and most valuable assets the rebellion had ever known. How can this be? He seems such a level-headed boy. The perfect face smiled.
Welcome. Welcome to the new era of the Empire. Akbar merely blinked at the image, not trusting the smiling face one bit. He knew the history as well as any other man, knew the stories of the once noble queen. It was indeed sad to know she had chosen to spend her life with a cause she had for years sworn against. But if she was there under her own volition, then she deserved whatever fate befell her. He strongly suspected this image was meant to placate all those who would listen. To seal her claim to the title of Empress, a victory at this battle would undoubtedly earn her. But if anything, Akbar's once wavering resolve was strengthened by this message. If two of the strongest freedom fighters their galaxy had ever known could be swayed to the side of darkness, then he damn well knew this was no power to be taken lightly, and he'd need all the strength he could muster to resist it. He knew others might not see it that way. After all, was that not Luke Skywalker before them, standing calmly aside the Lord Vader and her Lord? If Luke Skywalker himself had gone to the side of the Vaders and their empire, then what chance did any of them have in attempting to resist them? Even now my family and I have joined with those loyal to our cause. Akbar swore under his breath. A crew member or two not far away weren't as successful. It didn't take an idiot to figure out, even though few present here were old enough to remember enough of the stories to put the pieces together. Skywalker was the family of the Lady Vader, a son or nephew most likely. Lady Vader was Queen Amidala Skywalker. Lord Vader. Holy sea krakens below. Akbar didn't truly want to believe this boy would sell out his own side like the father. A war hero revered as equally as his son had been. Apparently had all those years ago. Even if he was not, though, there was little to be done about it now. There was no way to retrieve Skywalker. He knew that Commander was resourceful enough to escape, even Lord and Lady Vader if he truly wanted to. And have begun the end of Palpatine's reign. Once this battle is over, we will emerge victorious. The Empire will be free of the terror and oppression that has characterized it for so long. Under my leadership, your freedoms, your rights, and your citizenship will be returned to you, and will never be taken again. Out of the corner of his eye, Akbar saw a few of the younger officers and crewers tense their postures, lean forward a bit, grip the console of their station a little tighter. The voice who said those words might have been in a gentle maternal tone, belaying malignance, but the words were little changed from the smooth promises spoken by any number of rising leaders in the past. Not long before a tyrannical government soon rose in that person's very name. I come before you now to ask your continued support for me, she continued, and Akbar suppressed the crawling, slimy worm inside him as he caught the hazy cloud of pleading and almost manic desperation in her eyes. Mad, this woman was, truly mad. And she was this close to gaining unquestioned, uncontested leadership of the known galaxy. No matter what side you find yourself on now, Imperial, Rebel, join us and our differences will be forgotten. The time has come for us to restore the greatness and the glory of our galaxy. The image winked out, and the backdrop of space far diminished in activity from the time he had beheld it but a few minutes before, replacing it once more. It was as if the entire Bespin star system was holding its breath, waiting for the other person to blink, just to have any indication they were supposed to resume fighting again. What now, Admiral? One of the officers ventured at last. Akbar would have tightened his lips, were he human and had any. But it was he simply tightened his cheeks, the inside gills chafing slightly against his teeth. Part of him felt anger at Skywalker's apparent defection, if it was in fact that, and an even deeper sense of loss at perhaps loss of such a prominent source of morale and hope for the rebellion. Akbar might have seen a chance that things may not have been completely as they seemed for Skywalker, but not everyone would necessarily see things the same way. Victory or no, this would be marked as probably the saddest days in rebellion memory. Admiral? We continue, he said simply. Commander Skywalker's current position should have no bearing on how we do today. We fought before we were aware where he was, and he is less absent to us now. A single long blink of his eyes was the only thing that betrayed the feeling that his very stomach was being twisted in protest of the words in the last half of that last sentence. It wasn't a complete lie, after all. They would continue.